Vanakkam Dohadeva and everyone. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And we will share the screen. Very good. Stages of unfoldment in Saiva Siddhanta. We're continuing what we started last time. These are the four padas, Charya, Kriya, Yoga, and Jnana. And the basic material is from Merging with Shiva, chapter 52, the final conclusions for all mankind. And we have some supplementary material. And the most important point is we're highlighting Gurudeva's unique contributions in relationship to the recent Mahasamadhi celebration. So in each of the four padas, he has a few very important and unique contributions that I'll be pointing out. Last time, we did Anavamarga and Kriyapada. So today we're starting with the Kriyapada. Saivism demands deep devotion through bhakti yoga in the Kriyapada, softening the intellect and unfolding love. In the Kriyapada, religious action or worship stage or sadhana, which was mostly external in Charya, is now also internal. Our relationship with God in Kriya is a son to his parents, and thus this stage is called the Satputra Marga, true son's way. The Patavi is Samipya, nearness to God. So the last Patavi was Salokya, sharing the same world, but being at different ends of the world, so to speak, like in a big house. So this is, we're getting close, getting closer to God, which is one way of explaining the spiritual path. It's a question of, God's up here, we're down here, and we're moving closer and closer. That's a theistic way of explaining spiritual path. Kriya, literally action or rite, is a stirring of the soul in awareness of the divine, overcoming the obstinacy of the instinctive intellectual mind. The devotee will naturally want to worship and serve in the temple in more internalized ways. He will seek to understand why a stone image is a stone image, why stone images are needed at all. He will begin to think about the purpose of worship, the meaning of worship, the experience of worship. He will wonder to himself about the ancient customs and protocol and why these customs are followed in his community. He will delve into the scriptures, learning and studying about his religion, absorbing and intuiting their wisdom. Singing the sacred hymns, chanting the names of the Lord, and performing japa will become an important part of his devotion. He performs pilgrimage and fulfills the sacraments. Gurudeva's unique contribution to practicing Kriya is to include the 10 niyamas as a core practice. So that is not done in other writings. But it makes sense because if you read the practices of the Kriyapada, they are what's contained in the niyamas, as we will see. So we have 10 of them, which you're familiar with. I won't read them. Religious observances is how we translate niyamas. So one of the points that will come up in the Yogapada, which I'll duplicate here, is scripture. So scriptural listening, which Sanskrit is Siddhanta Shravana, is in the Kriyapada as part of the niyamas. But lots of writers, modern writers on Saiva Siddhanta, put it in the Yanapada, so it's not there in Gurudeva's approach. We learn scripture at this stage. Like Yogaswami, when he was young, he read a lot of scripture. Middle age and older, he didn't read any scripture. He just said the scripture's within you, study it. So it's natural to read scripture in our tradition when you're learning things at the beginning and when you're young. Singing the sacred hymns, chanting the names of the Lord, and performing japa will become an important part of his devotion. Devotion will well up from the recesses of his soul as he purifies himself. His heart begins to open as he evolves out of the instinctive mind into a spiritualized intellect, an intellect that is developed from within himself. His instinctive nature is subsiding and his intellectual nature is emerging as he comes into a full understanding of the laws of karma. As his intellect controls the instinctive mind, he understands for the first time the cause and effect, the action and reaction of his physical and mental activities, which is progress. Kriya blooms, Kriya blossoms into its fullness when there arises in his heart a desire, a strong desire to know and experience God, to penetrate into the realms of consciousness and reality beyond the physical plane, revealed by his grosser senses. He expresses this desire through continued worship in the very special environment of the Hindu temple or his home shrine. He worships the personal aspect of God, and his attitude is no longer one of fear, of a servant to a master, as it was in Charya. In Kriya, he looks upon God as a dutiful son to his father. He perceives that God is his personal Lord, concerned for the welfare of mankind, and he approaches God in a human, personal way. He wants to serve God, not because he fears the consequences of being an infidel, but because he wants to be in harmony with a higher reality which he reveres, to be attuned to the darshan of the deity. So there's an important point there, which is fear. We don't want to be experiencing fear when it comes to the temple or the shrine or worship. We don't also want to be experiencing guilt. So those are two qualities that we don't want to have in Hinduism. So fear is naturally outgrown as we improve our behavior. Guilt is dropped off as we realize that we went through the experiences everybody goes through. So we're not any different than anyone else. We're not worse than somebody else. We accept what we did and attribute it to the instinctive intellectual nature and move on. So we don't want any guilt. If we have guilt, we have to do Vasanada Tantra, etc., to get rid of it. So we want to be free of fear and free of guilt. That's the Hindu approach. One of Gurudeva's unique contributions to practicing the Kriyapada is to turn your entire house into God's house. So I don't know any other Hindu teacher who stressed that idea as much as Gurudeva did. The ideal of Ishvara Pujana worship is to always be living with God, living with Shiva in God's house, which is also your house, and regularly going to God's temple. This lays the foundation for finding God within. How can someone find God within if he doesn't live in God's house as a companion to God in his daily life? The answer is obvious. It would only be a theoretical pretense based mainly on egoism. If one really believes that God is in his house, what kinds of attitude does this create? First of all, since family life is based around food, the family would feed God in his own room at least 3 times a day, place the food lovingly before his picture, leave, close the door, and let God and his devas eat in peace. God and the devas do enjoy the food, but they do so by absorbing the pranas, the energies of the food, not the physical food. When the meal is over and after the family is eaten, God's plates are picked up too. What is left on God's plate is eaten as prasada, as a blessing. God should be served as much as the hungriest member of the family, not just a token amount. Of course, gods and the devas do not always remain in the shrine room. They wander freely throughout the house, listening to and observing the entire family, guests and friends. Since the family is living in God's house and God is not living in their house, the voice of God is easily heard as their conscience. For those in Kriya, darshan is not only the physical sight of the stone image in the temple. It is also an inner communion, a receiving of the blessings and the messages and the rays of second and third world beings who are actually conscious entities and whose consciousness is canalized through the sacred image by esoteric temple practices. This is a deeper perception of the darshan of the deity. In other words, in Charya, we start by our darshan, our sight of the deity, is just the physical deity. But in Kriya, we've gone deeper than that. We're feeling the spiritual energies that radiate from the Murti, and furthermore, we're becoming aware of messages contained within those energies that are for us. So that's unique and coming up here. Receiving messages. A unique insight from Gurudeva related to darshan is receiving messages from the deity. To understand darshan, consider the everyday and yet subtle communication of language. You are hearing the tones of my voice through the sensitive organ, your ear. Meaning comes into your mind, for you have been trained to translate these vibrations into meaning through the knowing of the language that I am speaking. Darshan is a vibration too. It is first experienced in the simple physical glimpse of the form of the deity in the sanctum. Later, that physical sight gives way to a clairvoyant vision or to a refined cognition received through the sensitive ganglia within your nerve system, the chakras. Through these receptors, a subtle message is received, often not consciously. Perhaps not immediately, but the message that the darshan carries direct from the Mahadeva, direct from Lord Ganesha, direct from Lord Murugan, direct from Lord Shiva himself, manifests in your life. This is the way the gods converse. It is a communication more real than the experience of language that you experience each day. It is not necessary to understand the communication immediately. The devotee may go away from the temple outwardly feeling that there was no particular message, or not knowing in his intellectual mind exactly what the darshan meant. Even the words you are now reading may not be fully cognized for days, weeks, or even months. The depth of meaning will unfold itself on reflection. So we've had some interesting experiences of messages in Kadabal. Generally, it's during powerful pujas, such as the monthly or yearly Ardra puja, and it's when the curtain opens. Alankara, different lamps are presented. I remember one person told me the story right afterwards. He couldn't believe it. He said, God spoke to me. And it was his birthday that day, and God told him to come back next year on his birthday. You got to come back next year on your birthday. That's what God asked him to do. It was just so real to the person. He was kind of still floating from that encounter with Nataraja. Other forms of religious expression naturally come forth for the devotees in this stage of unfoldment, such as attending pujas regularly, chanting, undertaking pilgrimages to temples and holy places, studying the scriptures. Midpoint in this stage of development of the soul, the devotee may psychically experience an aspect of God that he has been worshipping in the temple. He may see the deity in a dream or have a vision of him during a quiet period when he is sitting with his eyes closed after a puja. After this experience, he centers his life fully around God and learns to psychically attune himself to his darshan, his will. Once he fully understands his religion, if he has sufficient means, he may express his eagerness to serve through building a temple, for participation in such a project. Indeed, this is the great culmination of kriya. It is through the devotees in the kriya or bhakti yoga stage of the unfoldment of the soul that we have all over the world today magnificent Hindu temples built by people who have performed well, who have controlled their thoughts and actions, who have understood the laws of karma and the penalties of wrong action. They have avoided wrong action not out of fear, but because they have evolved into performing right action. Having released themselves from the dense fog of the instinctive mind, they can now build temples of great beauty, which reflect the beauties they have discovered within themselves in their personal communion with God, who to them is not an awesome master who might punish and discipline, but a loving Father. As he matures in kriya, the devotee unfolds a more and more intense love of God, to the point that he may well shed joyful tears during intense moments of worship. When that love is constant from day to day, when it is strong enough that he is capable of surrendering his individual will to God's cosmic will, then kriya or bhakti yoga has reached its zenith. So that's an important point. When the love is constant from day to day, strong, capable of surrendering, that's the fullness of kriya. So you're ready for yoga at that point. This giving up of his own will is a slow process as he unwinds the last remaining strands of his external will from the instinctive mind. His will was born of intellectual concepts, and these concepts too he releases unto God, feeling within his inmost being that he knows little of the grand mysteries of existence, an admission he could not make earlier. He realizes that he receives his inspiration, his energy, his very life from God. So that's really surrender. At this stage of kriya, the devotee learns patience. He learns to wait for the proper timing of things in his life. He is in no hurry. He is willing to wait for another life or for many more lives. There is no urgency. He trusts God and trusts the path he is on. He settles down and his life comes into a balance. He observes that he is in an evolutionary process along with thousands and millions of others. He embraces other devotees with renewed love and appreciation. He patterns his life in such a way that the temple is the hub of his culture, his religious activity and observance, his very thinking. From the temple or his home shrine, he goes forth to spend his days in the world, and to the temple or shrine he returns from the world. His life comes and goes from that sacred place. The Kriyapada also has 4 subdivisions. Charya and Kriya. Cleaning the shrine room and collecting all the necessary substances and implements needed for the daily worship of Shiva Linga. Kriya and Kriya. Performing Atmarta Puja to Shiva in the form of Shiva Linga as prescribed in the Agamas, with the preliminary 5 purifications after receiving initiation into that worship. So that's an important point. In Charya, we're attending the Parartha Puja. The priest is performing it. In Kriya, we're conducting the Atmarta Puja after initiation. So that's a more refined practice from attending someone else's puja to performing your own puja. Yoga and Kriya. Meditation after performing Atmarta Puja. Jnana and Kriya. The experiential knowledge gained by these practices. Anubhava Unakchi. Finishing the Kriya section with 2 verses from the Tirumandaram. Performing the worship, systematic study of the scriptures, praising the Lord, repeating the mantras, observing pure and good austerities, to be truthful, to be free from impurities. So that is the list of the niyamas, right? Performing the worship, Ishvara Pujana, systematic study of the scriptures, Siddhanta Shravana, praising the Lord, repeating the mantras, japa, observing pure and good austerities, tapas, to be truthful, satya, free from impurities. That to us is part of austerities. So you can see it's very clear that the niyamas are in the Kriyapada, but they're not normally listed there. But clearly they should be. Preparing the rice offering. These and the purification of oneself are the disciplines of faultless Satputra Marga. So as I mentioned last time, the terms are used interchangeably. Charyapada, Dasamarga, Kriyapada, Satputra Marga. They don't stick to one in the scriptures. Go back and forth. Being wholly under the possession of love, I would stand before the Lord with a melting heart. Every day I would offer the services needed for the Lord and the devotees, standing before the lotus feet of the Lord, whose form appears to have been made of pure and high-quality gold. I would supplicate, kindly bestow your grace on me. At this stage, Shiva entered my body, filling it up with light up to the pores of my bones. That's a pretty good experience. Oh, then we have review of Kriyapada, religious action or worship stage. Saputra Marga, true son's way, soul relates to God as a father to his son. Samipya Patavi, nearness to God. So how are we doing on time? That's a good place to stop. Next time we'll start with Yoga Pada. And we will stop sharing here. Oh.